As soon as he saw the desolate hillside with its thick cover of wood and bramble, Spook knew they were approaching the witch's cave. Escorted by the sentinel crows, the broom dipped downward and came to rest outside the entrance, where a giant tripod stood, outlined in the clear moonlight. From it hung an enormous kettle, and over this the head witch hovered, stirring with a long handle the loathsome mess that bubbled inside. She was preparing a tempting brew for the witches, returning from their Halloween sport, and indeed many of them were already gathered about her, cackling merrily. Their black bags, empty of tricks, were piled neatly to one side. At the sight of their mistress, the crows set up a hubbub of cawing. One flopped onto Grimilda's shoulder, the other perched on her hat. They lifted their wings and pointed accusing beaks at Grimilda as they poured out the tale of her disobedience. The head witch swung around to face them, slimy drops dribbling from the ladle in her hand. "What's that? What's that?" she demanded sharply. "Don't both talk at once! I can't make out a word you are saying." This time they took it more slowly, and the head witch wagged her ancient head in horror as she listened, her eyes darting fiercely to the witch on the broom. "Grimilda, Grimilda," she intoned as the crows caught on. "The moon in her zenith, and your bag of tricks still unused. Traveling without a familiar in sight?" She waved her dripping ladle at Jamie. "And carrying a human creature. Here is wickedness of the wrong sort altogether." Her gravelly old voice shook with rage. "You have seriously offended me, Grimilda. You have offended all your sisters." Grimilda dismounted from her broom and stood with drooping head before the head witch, her black bag still bulging full at her feet, and Jamie looking fearfully from behind her. The other witches took several steps backwards, staring at Grimilda in shocked disbelief. Their familiars spat at the half-hidden dog peering from the top of Grimilda's black bag and leaped into the shadows at the mouth of the cave. The two crows, having delivered their message, fell into a merciful silence and flew into the bushes to preen their feathers with evident satisfaction at a job well done. Laying down her ladle, the head witch hobbled to a pile of curiously arranged rocks nearby. Very slowly she lowered herself to this seat, unsettled the aged parrot that rode her shoulder, so that he squawked sourly into her ear. As soon as she was seated, the other witches fluttered around her. They arranged themselves in huddled black rows at her feet, their pointed faces turned upward, eagerly awaiting what might happen next. Then the head witch summoned Grimilda with an imperious crook of her finger. Grimilda obeyed, leaving behind her broom and the bag of tricks with Spook inside, and Jamie standing uncertainly between them. Spook hoped the boy would not try to bolt for it into the wooded hillside. The dog longed to poke his head out further so that he could lick Jamie's hand, but he dared not. "Well, Grimilda," the head witch began, "how do you account for yourself? How much mischief have you done tonight?" "A lot." Grimilda lowered her head again, but made no answer. "Some?" demanded the head witch. Grimilda's face began to twitch, but she was still. "Any at all?" "Achoo!" exploded Grimilda. "Achoo! Achoo!" "What kind of answer is that?" thuttered the head witch. "I had to sneeze," explained Grimilda. "The cats." "Had to sneeze? Had to sneeze? No witch has to sneeze. You must control yourself." She glanced over her shoulder at the cats crouching in the entrance of the cave. "Send those familiars deeper into the cave." One of the witches scurried to do her bidding. "Now, what were we about?" she went on to Grimilda. "Ah, yes, what mischief have you done? Which of my tricks have you used? Fetch that bag here." Her commanding finger shot out again, pointing to the bag of tricks, and another witch sprang to her feet. Spook ducked his head just as the bag was whisked across the ground and dumped before the head witch. Grimilda sneezing on the head witch and the parrot. I know that feeling. "Well," she roared, "which of them have you used?" "Only the dark cloud at a party I attended, and the shrinking cap on that boy there," sniffed Grimilda in a low voice. The head witch looked carefully at Jamie. "You lie!" she shrieked. "I don't know what you did at the party, but that boy has not been shrunk. He looks the usual size to me. Come here, boy." Jamie advanced hesitantly over the rough ground towards the ancient lady, his hands clenched at his sides. He had long since lost his mask and slippers, and the cord of his bathrobe had come undone. Scandalous. "Now then, boy," said the head witch when he stopped just before her, "tell me, how dared you take flight on the handle of a witch's broom?" Jamie drew a quick breath and looked straight into her piercing eyes. "Because of the little dog. She stole the little dog and took him away in that black bag. I had to get him back." "I didn't steal him," retorted Grimalda. "Spook is my property, and I can do with him what I like." "I can do with him what I like, whatever and whose ever he is," the head witch advised her nastily. Grimalda fell silent at this, staring at her pointed toes. The head witch grinned in a satisfied way and waved her hand. "Shake out the bag, so that we may see what is left in it." Two witches seized Grimalda's bag, turned it upside down, and shook. Spook, who was on top, rolled over twice and tumbled out. Scrambling up, he looked anxiously about him, at the ring of the watchful witches, and the head witch herself, at Grimalda, sullen and brooding, and at the little boy, standing forlornly in his bathrobe. Spook shook his coat once to gather his wits, and then hurled himself straight at Jamie's feet. The head witch flung her arms in the air. "It's the improper familiar!" At this sudden movement, the outraged parrot bit her on the elbow. With a yelp of pain, she snatched off her peaked hat, plucked the bird from her shoulder, loosening a shower of green feathers, and stuffed him into the crown. Then she replaced the hat on her head, and he was heard from no more. She stuffed the bird in her hat and put the hat back on her head. Who does that? After this interruption, the witches went back to shaking Grimalda's bag, an odd assortment of objects collected in a tangled mess on the ground. A skeleton, a shadow, a slim green snake, a small ghost, a rusty chain, a beaded pocketbook, and a lady's hat that looked like a beehive. The tricks were helplessly tangled, and to Spook's astonishment, they seemed to come alive as they poured from the bag. They did a great deal of kicking and calling of sharp names as they struggled to sort themselves out. The skeleton boxed briefly with the shadow, the pocketbook snapped nervously at the snake's tail, but at last they came smartly to attention before the head witch. She leaned forward to count them. "7," she said after counting twice. "7 left over." A murmur of disapproval rippled through the witches seated about her, and the tricks looked quite shamefaced. "Put yourselves away in the cave," said the head witch, in not unkindly tones. "You will have to wait until next year to be used. Well, it can't be helped." The tricks turned in a trim row and marched into the cave, the snake hissing fussily and the chain rattling sharply to keep them in line. The head witch watched them go, and then turned to Spook, still huddled close to Jamie, and wishing he were invisible. "Leave that boy at once, miserable animal, and go to your mistress. Unsuitable though you may be, she must make shift with you until she manages something better." Spook took a desperate grip on his ebbing courage and approached the head witch. "Please, your evilness," he tried in a trembling voice, "I'd rather stay with the boy." Here's all the tricks, the ghost and the skeleton and the shadow walking along alive. Not just a bag full of tricks, but a bag full of living tricks. Terrifying. "Nonsense," snorted the head witch. "You'd much better not. The boy is human, you know." She paused, but when Spook could think of no answer to this, she went on in a solemn voice. "You will discover, when you know them better, that humans have no regard for animals, never allow them the slightest bit of fun. No turning into a bat or a bear or a butterfly. Once a dog, always a dog is the kind of treatment you get from them." I don't care," he said. I'm comfortable just being a dog." "And what about somebody to talk to?" the head witch continued. "They'll never understand a word you say. They could if they wanted to, take the trouble, but they won't even try." I've noticed that, but I don't mind. I haven't so very much to say anyway, really." "Whatever you mind or not is of no importance," she said. "The point is, Grimalda cannot do without a familiar, and you, however unsuitable, are hers." Spook had a sudden sad vision of Grimalda's house and himself curled up forever on her blackened hearth, a bowl of bat's wings in front of his nose. He dropped his head and crept stubbornly back to Jamie's bare feet. Grimalda jerked up her head with a snort of impatience. She lunged toward Spook and made a quick pass with her hand over his head, mumbling a strange jumble of words. At once Spook began to feel very unlike himself. He seemed to be shrinking and rolling up like a sausage. The ground appeared to be closer than usual, everything on it looked very large, and he wondered what had become of his feet. In a moment he was crawling on Jamie's foot in the fuzzy coat of a black and yellow caterpillar. He's transformed Spook into a caterpillar. Indeed, he had hardly realized he was a caterpillar when he felt himself being scooped up in Jamie's hand and plunged into the pocket of his bathrobe. But Spook barely had the time to make out where he was before he was feeling queer again, and bigger. The pocket began to swell and bulge and finally to rip. Then it came apart at all of its seams, and Spook fell to the ground. He was a small dog once more, and his head was a whirl of confusion. Jamie knelt down beside Spook and patted him all over to make sure he was really safe. This hair just will not stay out of my face. The head witch rocked with pleasure on her stony seat. "Well done, boy," she chortled. "Oh, well done! You have out-tricked Grimalda. You turned the familiar back to a dog." Jamie looked up surprised. "I did?" "No doubt about it. Hee hee. What a delight. But wait." Abruptly sober, her eyes glittered suspiciously at Jamie. "How did you do it, eh? Could it be that you are you a magician?" she demanded.